Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending our Joshua Tree, Western Joshua Tree workshop. We got a few presentations for you all this for the first portion of this meeting. And then after that, we'll kind of have more of an open forum, question and answer session. And yep, hopefully answer all your questions, get some good feedback on the conservation plan. But first off, I'll kick it over to Isabel Bear. Go ahead.
Recording in.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I think before we do the Q&A, Tracy's going to provide some instruction, who's hosting our meeting today. Thank you, Tracy, on participating in the meeting. Can you go ahead and do that for us, Tracy?
Sure. Thank you so much, Isabel. So today's meeting, we're going to start with a presentation. We want to remind you that we are recording this meeting. So by staying on the meeting, you do consent to being recorded. If you have any Zoom issues, technical questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the Q&A. If you also have any clarifying questions about the presentation, please put them in the Q&A throughout. And then at the end of the meeting, at the end of the presentation, we will have time for public comment. And so you'll be able to provide verbal comment. And we'll also let you know the best way to reach us for specific questions, via email or to call in. So thank you so much. And it's just a reminder, when it does come time for comments, to please be respectful of everyone in the room. Thank you. Back to you, Isabel.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Okay, good morning. I would like to thank everyone for attending this workshop today. My name is Isabel Bear, and I manage CDFW's Native Plant Program. Like Tracy said, we will have different presenters throughout this meeting who will introduce, we will introduce as we go along. We also have staff from our regional offices and headquarters permitting and native plant programs who will be able to respond to questions. Please note that the presentation for this morning is the same as this afternoon. You do not have to come to both meetings unless you really want to, but it's going to be exactly the same presentation, and it will be posted on our website once we complete the events for today and get that cleaned up. You already heard the basic meeting information regarding how to participate in this workshop, and I would like to thank you in advance for your participation and feedback. Throughout the meeting, we ask for all attendees to listen to others with an open mind and with respect for other participants' views and opinions. So, next slide, please. All right. So based on the comments we've received, we've realized that there is confusion about the provisions in the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act, the permitting systems it creates, and the role the conservation plan has in it. So during today's workshop, we want to provide some clarity and a brief overview of the provisions created by the California legislature within the Act, how the department is implementing permitting systems based on the provisions in the Act, and we will discuss the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Plan and its role in conserving Western Joshua Tree. We will also provide a summary of comments received on the draft plan and some anticipated changes to the draft plan based on those comments. Next slide, please. Okay, let's get started with the Act. Next slide. The Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act is a state law enacted by the California legislature and signed by the governor in July 2023. Its goal is to conserve Western Joshua Tree. CDFW is implementing the Act as written and does not have the authority to rewrite California law. As a note, Western Joshua Tree is still listed as a candidate under the California Endangered Species Act, or CESA. And not only do the protections of CESA continue to apply, but the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act is written in a way that it intersects CESA at various places. Next slide, please. Let's start with some definitions. These definitions are important in how the department implements the Act. The term take is not defined in the Act, so CDFW must refer to the Fish and Game Code, Section 86, which defines take as hunt, pursue, catch, capture, or kill, or attempt to do those things. The Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act, as you see on the slide, also, which is a part of Section 1927 of the Fish and Game Code, is also part of the Fish and Game Code, and it defines dead Western Joshua tree and desert native plant specialist. Next slide, please. The Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act is similar to the California Endangered Species Act in that it prohibits people or public agencies from import, export out of the state, or take, possess, purchase, or sell within the state Western Joshua tree or any part or product thereof, without authorization to do so. The only mechanisms CDFW can use to authorize these activities are through permits. As you can see on the slide, CDFW can issue permits under the authority of the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act, the California Endangered Species Act, as well as part of a natural community conservation plan and other types of take mechanisms. The Act itself allows the department to issue two kinds of permits. Next slide, please. The first is what we call the hazard management permit. Here, the provisions of the Act allow CDFW to create a streamlined legal mechanism to trim or remove dead trees, or trim live trees that are a hazard to public health and safety. There is no option for removing live trees, nor is there an option for removing diseased or dying trees under this section. To qualify for these permits, trees or limbs must meet certain conditions. A tree or a limb has to have fallen and be within 30 feet of a structure, be leaning against an existing structure, or create an imminent threat to public health and safety. The Act also defines accessory structure as, but not limited to, a residence, accessory dwelling unit, garage, carpool, swimming pool, patio, greenhouse, storage shed, gazebo, septic tank, solar panels, fence, or driveway. As written within the Act, only a desert native specialist can trim a live tree or remove a dead tree that is still rooted in the ground. Detached trees and limbs may be removed by the property owner. Thank you. The other type of permit the Act allows is an Incidental Take Permit, or ITP. The Act specifies the conditions under which an applicant can obtain an ITP. These conditions include providing a census of each stem arising from the ground, including its size class and a photo. The conditions also include that the permittee avoid and minimize impacts to, and the taking of, the Western Joshua tree to the maximum extent practicable, and that the department may require relocation of one or more Western Joshua tree as a permit minimization measure. In addition to direct mortality of a Western Joshua tree, take may also include actions that result in a detrimental but non-lethal impact, such as trimming or encroachment on root systems. So here's where things start getting really complicated, and this is all as it's written in the Act. The Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act also establishes an in lieu fee program and, as you can see on the slide, the initial fee structure. An applicant pays a fee in lieu of completing mitigation obligations, and a mitigation obligation is different from a minimization measure. The Act also established two sets of fees, the standard fee and the reduced fee. The department did not select the area eligible for a reduced fee. However, permits issued by cities and counties with delegated authority can also qualify for the reduced fee once they are enrolled. The Act requires the department to adopt and amend regulations to adjust the fees by December 31st, 2026. This is different than the annual fee that just occurred. This is a big fee review an adjustment. And then we have to do this again at least every 3 years thereafter. For this, the department will go through our regular rulemaking process, which includes an opportunity for the public to participate and to comment, and we invite you to do so at that time. So where do the fees go? The fees go directly into the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Fund. The Act describes some of the uses of the fund, but CDFW is to prioritize acquisition and management of conservation lands. The fund is held by a third-person party, and the fees are not used to cover expenses of the department directly in implementing the Act. Next slide. Some more provisions of the Conservation Act. We will cover the relocation guidelines and protocols later, but here is some other information. The department was instructed to adopt the relocation guidelines and protocols by July 2024. This document should include direction to maximize survival of relocated trees, such as planting and proper orientation, and relocating trees at a time that maximizes survival. The Act also requires that a desert native plant specialist be on site to oversee relocation. The Act also allows the department to limit relocation to certain size classes and to require that a permittee be responsible to implement measures that facilitate the successful relocation and survival of the trees. The Act further states that a landowner who willingly accepts relocated Joshua Tree shall not be held responsible for their survival or maintenance and does not need to change the existing land use as long as it does not result in the further translocation of trees. For this, the permittee is ultimately responsible as a condition of their permit. And last, the relocation guidelines and protocols may be updated at any time and as new information is available. Based on feedback received on our initial version, the department is working on revisions. Here are some additional provisions of the Act. I mentioned delegation agreements earlier. A city or county can be delegated the authority to issue both the hazard management permit and the incidental take permit and be included in the reduced fee area. We have been in discussions regarding this opportunity with various local government partners. Next, we'll talk about the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Plan as a third part of the presentation. The Act also requires reporting. CDFW is required to provide an annual report to the legislature and the Fish and Game Commission. And last, the Fish and Game Commission is directed to reconsider the listing of Western Joshua Tree under CISA in 2033. Okay, now we will provide an overview of the two permitting systems created by the Act. Hazard management permits. We just covered a bit about the criteria, so I'm not going to bore you with that again. To apply, these permit applications are available on our website, along with instructions on what types of information is needed to process an application. The QR code on this page will take you to the hazard management permit website directly. When applying, it is best to include a written description of the work you are requesting and photos of the tree or limbs at various angles. The hazard management permit application must be submitted by the property owner where the Western Joshua Tree is located. This is a requirement of the Act. The fastest way to process your hazard management permit application is by submitting the application via DocuSign on our website or emailing a completed application to wjthazardpermit@wildlife.ca.gov, like you can see on the slide. Once submitted, the permit must be processed within 30 days of receipt or 10 days of receipt, depending on the information provided in the application. For any hazard management permit questions, please email us again at the email address on the slide. Here we have some examples for hazard management permit. The photo on the left, this is a tree that is still alive and cannot be removed under the HMP. In issuing a hazard management permit, CDFW cannot authorize the removal of a living tree, and this is the most common reason for denied applications. The photo in the middle, this tree would be approved for trimming because the Western Joshua tree limb against the electric wire meets the criteria for creates an imminent threat to public health and safety. The photo on the right, this tree would be approved for removal because it meets the criteria for dead as it is fully detached and meets the condition of being within 30 feet of a structure, the structure being the fence and the driveway. So with that, I will switch to our next speaker who will walk you through the incidental take permitting process. Brandy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Isabel. I don't know, am I not coming up on camera now? I was earlier. I'll go ahead and start. So when do we apply for the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act incidental take permit? So Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act incidental take permit is needed for any project that may cause take of a Western Joshua tree, including its roots, and that wants coverage for such take under the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act. So how do we apply? These instructions are on our website. We have a Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act incidental take permit process guide. And this is an image of one of our application. We need to have a couple of things in this, and I'll go into more details in the next slide, but we need a clear understanding of your project. There needs to be a census. The application forms need to be completely filled out. And then you can submit your documents to the individual regional office that serves the area where your project is located. Applications can be submitted either via email or US mail. They can also be submitted through our Environmental Permitting Information Management System, EPIMS, which we have a document repository. Thanks. So the application information needed is here to fill out your permit. We'll talk about how to conduct a census on the next slide. Also, please do not send in a check. Just calculate what you think the fee will be based on the census. Our regional staff will confirm the correct amount and issue an invoice later in the process. Also, issuance of the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act permit, incidental take permit, is a discretionary permit with no exemptions to CEQA that were provided in the Act. And so therefore, CDFW as a responsible agency needs to comply with CEQA. So if there is not a CEQA lead agency, the applicant should contact the applicable CDFW regional office to discuss the appropriate approach to CEQA. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so in talking about the census, again, these instructions are included on our website. To conduct a census, you first need to determine the census area, which is your project area plus a 50-foot buffer. We'll go into the reasoning for the buffer on the next slide. After you determine your census area, you'll measure and record the tree sizes, locations, and other information, like whether it's alive or dead, whether it's or has ever produced flowers or fruit, and then you'll take a photograph of the tree. We'll also need a map of the project site and the location of the trees. We've developed a couple of tools to help applicants through this process. One is a form through Survey 123, which is a free app where you can record all of the information, take a photo, and submit it to us. We also have some instructions on how to create a map in Google Earth. It's important to note here that CDFW does not require a desert native plant specialist to conduct the census. It can be done by anyone, including the landowner. So we were talking about buffers, and we use buffers in order to assess impacts on all trees, not just the ones on your property or within the project area. We ask applicants to survey within a 50-foot buffer of the project site. This is because roots of Joshua trees can extend for a good distance beyond the tree. The way the act was written and existing laws state that take of the tree and parts thereof, which can include roots, is prohibited. The best available published science says that roots have been observed 11 meters or 36 feet from a tree. Unfortunately, not much information is provided about the size of that tree. So to ensure no roots are taken, for now, we include a 50-foot buffer around trees 1 meter or greater, and a 25-foot buffer around trees less than 1 meter. We will be updating this as more published science becomes available. If the census buffer area extends into neighboring properties, landowner permission should be obtained. However, so whenever possible, to document any Western Joshua trees on those adjacent properties. If you can't accurately gather that data and photographs of those trees within the buffer area due to private property concerns, just note that in the census. So once we receive the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act ITP application, we'll assign staff and they'll begin review of the application, census, and photographs. The staff may reach out via email or letter for any questions, missing information, or to request a site visit, and then also to discuss a relocation plan if that's applicable. Once CDFW reviews and confirms the census, an invoice will be prepared, and the staff will begin drafting the incidental take permit, including project-specific avoidance and minimization measures. The applicant will pay the invoice fees, and then CDFW will issue the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act, ITP. Here, we include the current fee schedule, which reflects the annual increase for inflation that Isabel talked about earlier. So you've received your Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act incidental take permit. You can begin work in compliance with those permit conditions. Avoidance and minimization measures may be required prior, during, and after construction activities. These are determined on a case-by-case basis, depending on the level of project's impact. Some permits may also include monitoring and reporting requirements. Like Isabel mentioned, there are other non-Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act permits, and they include, our California Endangered Species Act incidental take permits, the Natural Community Conservation Plan that Isabel mentioned, but also safe harbor agreements, local voluntary local programs, and then also through our 2081A, our Fish and Game Code 2081A permits, or with an MOU. So this information is also on our website, but these are for contact information for project-specific questions. Please reach out to the regions first. We are always happy to talk with you during your drafting of your Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act application process. General questions can be sent to the Western Joshua Tree email there, and then any hazard management permit questions can be sent to wjthazardpermit@wildlife.ca.gov. And I think Drew is going to take over relocation.
Yeah. Thanks, Brandy. I'm just going to talk about kind of the relocation guidelines that we adopted last July. So as mentioned before, the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act required certain things of these relocation guidelines. One that was that they were based on the best available science, and that desert native plant specialists were consulted. And so we did kind of like a deep dive into the literature, and then also contacted various folks that have extensive experience with Joshua Tree relocation. And some of the key things that we learned both through the literature and through our, talking with specialists was that aftercare is key for success. So this includes things like watering the tree for a certain amount of time. Also just making sure that, they're upright standing, that, there aren't any other kind of pests or, impacts that are occurring to these trees once they are relocated, because they are kind of in a sensitive state for that short period after. We also learned that, there are various methods for relocating trees with, varying kind of rates of success. The best method that, can get very high survivalship is through a tree spade. That is kind of here on the screen right here. So it's a specialized piece of equipment that kind of minimizes disturbance to that root ball. You can see that they can just like kind of pick up a tree and then they would, plop it in a hole that was also dug with the tree spade. But, it can also be done with other kind of heavy equipment. Backhoes have been used in the past. You can, dig up small ones with shovels, but you do need to kind of minimize damage to that critical root mass right below the tree. Also, the tree health matters. So, if trees look like they're already being impacted by drought stress, or other impacts like pests and things like that. Those do not make good candidates for relocation, as they might not have the reserves in order to be able to reestablish their root systems afterwards. So, some of the guidelines that, we developed, were based on minimizing the impacts to populations by preventing habitat fragmentation. We want to retain the genetic diversity of those individuals. They can be useful in restoring degraded Western Joshua tree populations, either by fire or other kind of anthropogenic impacts. And then, these trees also kind of, provide, either food or, reproduction places for, the animals that have relied on them. And so having them around kind of preserves that connectivity between populations. And so, we asked for, the salvaging and relocation of a small portion of those trees to accomplish those minimization to impacts. And, these guidelines, and kind of the requirements that are kind of in the protocols that we developed are, based on a case-by-case basis. The regions will work with permittees to try to address any kind of issues that are occurring, and, just adjustments can be made to these, kind of suggested guidelines that we kind of put out there. So it is, also really important that we note that we want to keep trees close to their original location to kind of accomplish those minimization of impacts. So preventing habitat fragmentation, and preserving the connectivity of those areas where they were before, but now have been removed. And so we really want to keep these trees as close as possible. However, they could be very important in restoring degraded areas that are further away from these areas. So, Joshua trees and most native plants are specifically kind of adapted to the conditions where they are currently growing. There's kind of a lot of research out there that, like has proven that like seed collected from where the, these plants are going to be planted does better than seed that was collected from elsewhere, just because that those individuals have kind of adapted over time and, you know, have been successful in that area. And so there's, you know, kind of some evidence that points that, you know, moving trees or plants or genetics to different areas has the ability to kind of introduce novel genes into those areas that might not be best adapted, and that could have negative impacts on those populations where those trees are moved to. You know, there's also some evidence to support, conversely, that you know, populations may benefit by having certain genes move into them. This is something that is discussed as assisted gene flow, but there has to be kind of a good understanding of what you know, kind of genetic traits are where, so that we can be moving the best ones to the areas where you know, they might have better conditions in the future. You know, so like, you know, it would, in order to do this, you know, we have to have an understanding of where these populations are. And we know that there are researchers out there that are currently working on this type of data. Yep. And so, you know, we acknowledge that there, you know, has been some difficulty here. We're working on an updated version of the relocation guidelines and protocols. And so we can, you know, talk about these later. And, you know, we'll, or you can talk about it with your region. So I'm not going to go too in depth to the protocols. So we talked about the guidelines. This is actually about the moving of the trees, but our, you know, guidelines and protocol document that we developed, they're very thorough. It kind of covers everything that needs to happen kind of before trees are moved, while they are being moved, and then after they are moved. And so you can kind of see some of the major, you know, topics that we discuss here. All right. So with that, now we're going to go into the conservation plan portion of our presentation. Just to provide kind of a, you know, brief overview of what the Conservation Act requires the conservation plan to have. It says that the conservation plan has to have management actions necessary for the conservation of the species. You know, and effectiveness criteria to assess the effectiveness of those management actions. It specifically states that there needs to be guidance to avoid and minimize impacts to Western Joshua tree. It calls for the protocols for successful relocation to be also in there, and that you know, the CDFW works with federal, state, local agencies, California Native American tribes, and the public to develop the conservation plan. So furthermore, specifically about California Native American tribes, is that the department need to consult with them to include co-management principles, incorporate traditional ecological knowledge, and to provide for the relocation of trees to tribal land upon request. So we're not going to go over, you know, the conservation plan kind of in depth here. We did present it, you know, at the Fish and Game Commission meeting about a month ago. You know, the first chapter includes kind of the introduction, the vision and purpose of the conservation plan. The second chapter includes the planning influences, which are just like kind of the local or state or federal regulations and ordinances pertaining to Western Joshua tree. Chapter 3 is, you know, kind of a summary of the input we received from Native American tribes regarding the traditional values and uses of Western Joshua tree. And chapter 4 is kind of a, it's like an extension of the status review that was developed in 2022. We incorporated some new information here on climate refugia, which we can kind of talk about in a little bit. Chapter 5 includes the management actions necessary to conserve the species. Chapter 6 is some of our strategies for implementing those management actions. All right, and then appendices kind of includes, you know, some more background information on all the input that we received. The relocation guidelines are incorporated into there for advisory purposes. And, you know, it has some other information, you know, that on specific kind of best practices for management actions. Okay, so yeah, we compiled the written comments received before the commission meeting. We looked at we heard and compiled the public comments that were given at the meeting. And then we also incorporated or, you know, looked at some of the comments that we received from commissioners specifically during their discussion at that meeting. All of the, you know, the meeting recording and then, you know, most of the comment letters that were received ahead of time are available on the Fish and Game Commission's 2025 meetings website. Which you can go there and you can watch the full, you know, conversation that was had. All right. So, yeah, many, maybe even a majority of the comments that we received on the conservation plan were kind of in response to the provisions of the Conservation Act, or kind of with the way that CDFW was implementing the permitting systems. And so, you know, there were some comments that were relevant to the conservation plan, but most of them kind of in this space were kind of outside of the purview of what the conservation plan is supposed to be doing. And so, you know, we wanted to provide some clarity at the beginning of this meeting kind of on the differences of the Conservation Act, the permitting, and the conservation plan, to, you know, hopefully kind of clarify what can and can't be changed through the conservation plan. Specifically, you know, we heard there needed to be some more clarity on what the, you know, take is considered and what impacts are considered. We kind of explain, you know, where our rationale is for coming up with some of the take and the buffers. You know, we're heard from individual landowners about, you know, the fees and kind of them being really high on landowners. We, you know, didn't really set the fees. We are just kind of implementing the Conservation Act as written. But, you know, as noted earlier, in 2026, so by 2027, we will go through our rulemaking process, which will be a very kind of public process with comment, input received. You know, we also heard from a lot of, you know, different commenters about, you know, exemptions for certain types of activities or certain kind of projects. Again, you know, there was no specific exemptions kind of written into the Conservation Act. And so CDFW is just implementing the act kind of as written. And, you know, we also heard, you know, that there needed to be some other options, including, you know, including like banks, mitigation banks and stuff that were, you know, kind of exist within that permitting kind of aspect, but they are available. So, and then as mentioned, yeah, there were a lot of comments that pertained to the conservation plan, you know, providing some clarity on how the act and the plan kind of differ and where they kind of overlap. We heard that, there needs to be more transparency of how the conservation fund is spent and, kind of where the priorities are for spending the conservation fund. We just heard some missing information, which, we were kind of, we'll be kind of including, we'll be reaching out to maybe some specific agencies or non-governmental organizations. We heard some suggestions for, including more adaptive management to the plan, looking at the best available science, best credible science for some of the research and information actions. We heard, a few folks talk about these restoration management permits, which CDFW just began kind of issuing early this year. They're still kind of developing right now, but possibly incorporating some of that into the future for the conservation strategy. We heard that there were some, kind of questions about how the geographic focus area, which was, kind of the 5-mile buffer around the range of where Western Joshua Tree is, and how management actions will be implemented in there. Within that boundary. We also heard from the public that, like you wanted to see the maps and the data. And so we're, considering some of these, changes, but a lot of it might be kind of in the purview of other agencies that have yet to publish this data. We also heard, a lot of great ideas for research topics and how to include the public. We heard some information, some suggestions for making the effectiveness criteria more measurable, more achievable. We heard those. And then to clearly identify or, define our, how we want to, what is our strategy for protecting climate refugia? So that's just like kind of a broad overview of the topics that we received. And so based on those comments and suggestions, these are kind of some of the anticipated changes we are looking at for the updated final draft of the conservation plan that will be presented in June. As mentioned at the commission meeting, we held an additional community workshop with tribal members in Joshua Tree at the end of February. So we'll be updating that information. We heard that there was missing information on special districts kind of within the area and how those, provide services to citizens like water districts. And so we'll be kind of having a little discussion in there. We'll be looking at our effectiveness criteria and making sure that they align with SMART principles, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And then we did hear that there was, it's kind of a little, not necessarily confusion, but it wasn't really spelled out kind of how we are incorporating different climate change scenarios into our analyses. So in, a lot of the effectiveness criteria and the management units, we looked at what some might call the ROSI outlook. So it was the low emissions scenario. And so, we are looking to include what, moderate and higher some emission scenarios are for some of these climate models that are being produced, and how we are going to be incorporating that. But, we were looking at this low emission scenario as kind of our goal to protect the most amount of land and account for maybe discrepancy within the model and future conditions. But, we were planning on using moderate and high emission scenario to kind of prioritize some actions. And so we're going to be looking at including, more clarified guidance kind of on, what our strategy will be for moderate and high emission scenario areas. Yeah, and then we also heard, more discussion would like to be seen about, assisted migration and preserving connectivity. And this was kind of in relation to like short distance assisted migration, not necessarily, long distance, many miles of moving trees, but what is needed to kind of look after, trees that need to naturally migrate. So these are kind of what are called stepping stone habitats. So we'll be adding some more information on, our land conservation and management, management action number 1 in there on that. All right, and then yeah, these were also some anticipated changes that we're including. So providing some, additional clarifying language on the Conservation Act, Conservation Plan, kind of buffers, references, etc. We are going to be updating our conservation lands prioritization assessment, which was kind of included as an appendix in the conservation plan, but this assessment provides criteria for how land conservation acquisitions will be prioritized. And so we'll be updating it with some more information, more detailed information on kind of, moderate and high emission scenario modeled habitat. Also we heard that there was a lot of concern about how, the fees are not, are a lot for, single family homeowners. We don't have the ability to, adjust those fees now or exempt certain projects. But we do want to include a discussion to acknowledge that this, is kind of could be a burden on single family homeowners. And then, as kind of mentioned at the commission meeting, we're going to be updating our relocation guidelines and protocols, provide a little bit more clarity, provide some more flexibility and kind of some of the provisions or some of the conditions in those protocols and guidelines. And we'll be just making some small minor formatting changes, updating some references, things like that. And then lastly, we will be looking at all the information and feedback that we receive at these 2 public workshops today, to see what else we can kind of incorporate.
I just want to thank everyone again for your participation, for your thoughts and your questions, and for spending your time with us on a Monday. If you think of things and you want to provide comment later, please join our 3 p.m. meeting or provide in writing to wjt@wildlife.ca.gov. Thank you so much and have a great day.